Hello and welcome. My name is Bashir Fadl, and on behalf of LearnITCoursesOnline.com, as well as LearnJobsOnline.com, I'd like to thank you. We do know that you have a variety of choices of IT training, and you've chosen us, so we really appreciate that and hope that you enjoy it. Thank you. The term Salesforce Sandbox refers to a development or testing environment within Salesforce. A sandbox is created as a copy of the current production organization and is provisioned with all of the configuration, code, and setup data, such as metadata from the organization. Record data may be included depending on the type of Salesforce Sandbox. Sandbox is initially a copy or a replica of production. It is not automatically synced with production in any way. The changes in production will not automatically be reflected in the Salesforce Sandbox. And so a Salesforce Sandbox is a snapshot of our production environment on the date that we create or refresh it. A Sandbox instance is created in a separate environment for a variety of purposes, such as development, testing, and training, without affecting the data and configuration in our Salesforce production environment. Now, it's key to remember that there is different versions of sandboxes, and also that we can manage multiple sandboxes depending on our licenses or additional sandbox purchases. Each Salesforce Sandbox instance is isolated from the other instance. So operations performed in one sandbox will not affect another sandbox or your production environment. We can deploy change sets from one sandbox to another sandbox with the same production org. Also, change sets are deployed from and to production with the sandbox. In Salesforce, we have 4 different sandbox types. It is very useful to understand the advantages and disadvantages of each Salesforce sandbox type. Different sandbox types include number 1, a full sandbox, number 2, a partial data sandbox, number 3, a developer sandbox, and number 4, a developer pro sandbox. Salesforce Sandbox, again, is a snapshot of our production environment on the date we create and refresh it. A sandbox instance is created in a separate environment for a variety of purposes, such as development, testing, and training, without affecting the data and configuration in our Salesforce production instance. So now let's examine the 4 types of sandboxes. Number 1, the full sandbox in Salesforce. A full Salesforce sandbox includes all of the metadata and data from our production org. So all object records, custom setting records, and the like will be available in our full sandbox. Number 2, partial data sandbox in Salesforce. Partial data Salesforce sandbox are very similar to the full sandbox, except that they only allow a subset of the data to be copied to the sandbox from production. Salesforce offers a sandbox copy engine that assists with the selection of data to be copied. Up to 10,000 records of each selected object will be included in the copy. Additionally, file and data storage is limited to 5 gigs. Now let's look at number 3 and 4, which are developer and developer pro sandboxes. Developer and developer pro sandboxes will include no data from production, and they only consist of the metadata. This is often sufficient for testing needs. If additional data is needed, we can manually create it with the user interface or load it in a set of data via data loader. So this table shows us by the different type of sandboxes, items such as the refresh interval, storage limits, what information is being copied, and if we can create a template. In Salesforce, to create a full sandbox and partial copy sandbox, Salesforce Sandbox template must be created and applied at sandbox creation. For Developer and Developer Pro Sandbox, there is no need to create a Salesforce Sandbox template. So what is a Salesforce Sandbox template? Salesforce Sandbox template allows users to pick specific objects and data to full sandbox or partial copy sandbox to control the size and content of each Salesforce sandbox. When creating a sandbox template, we can select standard and custom object data. Some objects are included before selecting data because they are required in any organization. Sandbox template can understand the relationship of the selected objects. Selected objects list can be displayed with a total selected number. To create a partial copy sandbox and full sandbox, we must create and apply a sandbox template at creation time, although there is a maximum of 5 gigs of data storage and 5 gigs of file storage that can be stored. For each selected object in the sandbox template, up to 10,000 records are brought over from the production environment. So now we move to creating a Salesforce Sandbox template. We start by navigating to Setup, and then click Deploy, and then Sandboxes. Or simply go to Setup, and in the Search or Find window, type Sandboxes. In this step, we click on Sandboxes. Now a new page will be displayed with 3 tabs, which are Sandboxes, Sandbox Templates, and Sandbox History. We're going to select Sandbox Template and then click on New Sandbox Template. And now we enter the 10-character name and description for the Sandbox template. Now to add objects to our Salesforce Sandbox template, we select the checkbox for each object from the available objects list. Selected objects list will be displayed as shown. When we deselect the checkbox object, it will be removed from the selected object list. After confirming all of our choices, finally we click on the Save button. For example, if we have a Salesforce Sandbox template that includes only accounts to create a partial sandbox, then up to 10,000 account records will be copied into the new sandbox. Unlike the Developer and Developer Pro sandboxes, the partial copy sandbox can only be refreshed once every 5 days. A sandbox can be created, refreshed, and deleted. When we create the new Salesforce Sandbox, Salesforce will automatically copy our data from the production organization into the new created Salesforce Sandbox for development, testing, and training without affecting the data and configuration in our Salesforce production org. Now we move to how to create a Salesforce Sandbox. In Salesforce, to create a full sandbox and partial copy sandbox, the sandbox template must be created and applied at sandbox creation. To create a new Salesforce sandbox, we navigate to Setup, then Deploy, then Sandboxes. Or simply go to Setup and then search and find Sandboxes and click on Sandboxes. After clicking on Sandboxes, in this case, we're going to create a partial copy Salesforce Sandbox. So we click on the New Sandbox button, which allows us to create a new Salesforce Sandbox. The Sandbox Template tab is used with partial copy sandboxes and determines the type of record and data that is to be copied over from the production environment. The Sandbox History tab allows you to see the sandbox refresh history, showing when sandboxes were created and who created them. The refresh link allows you to replace an existing sandbox with a newer copy. The existing copy of the sandbox remains available while the refresh completes and until you activate the new copy. So in this case, we're going to start by entering the name, which is 10 characters or less, and description for the sandbox. Next, we select the type of the sandbox that we want to create. And in this case, we have selected the partial copy sandbox, and then we click Next. Salesforce Sandbox template allows us to pick specific objects and data to full sandbox or partial copy sandbox to control the size and content of each Salesforce sandbox. We then select the template from the list and click Create. Now the process of creating the partial copy sandbox will take several minutes to several hours or days, depending on the size and type of our organization. In this case, as we can see, we have successfully created the Salesforce Sandbox called Dev Sandbox. In this segment, we're going to learn how to log in into Salesforce Sandbox through test.salesforce.com. Salesforce Sandboxes are separate CRM environments that are isolated from our Salesforce production organization. So any actions that happen in our sandboxes do not affect our Salesforce production environment and vice versa. So sandboxes that we create in Salesforce can be viewed and managed. To view the list of sandboxes in Salesforce, we can navigate to Setup, Sandboxes. As shown, we have one sandbox now called Dev Sandbox, and the sandbox type is Partial Copy Sandbox. The status of our sandbox is completed. The location is CS57, and we also have the current org ID and also displays the date when it is completed. When our sandbox is ready for use, we receive a notification email that our sandbox has completed copying. As shown in the email alert, which is sent, now we can log into Salesforce Sandbox through the URL https://test.salesforce.com. To access our sandbox, click on the link in the notification email. User can log in into the sandbox at https://test.salesforce.com by appending the sandbox name to their Salesforce usernames. Users can log in to an active sandbox by using the URL https://test.salesforce.com and entering a modified username, which is username from production with a suffix for the name of the sandbox. Here our sandbox name is Dev Sandbox. So for example, if our username for the production org is Bashir Fadl at learnitcoursesonline.com and the sandbox name is Dev Sandbox, then the modified username to log into the sandbox is Bashir Fadl at learnitcoursesonline.com.devsandbox. Sandboxes that no one has logged into for more than 180 days are deleted. Users who have created or mostly recently refreshed any sandboxes with the organization will be notified that the sandbox is scheduled for deletion. These users will receive at least 3 email notifications over 30 days prior to the deletion. With this, we come to the end of this session, and we'd like to thank you for joining us. And also, don't hesitate to visit our website at learnitcoursesonline.com to leave your feedback and reviews. And also look at our events. We have a lot of free sessions, and we'd be more than happy to have you join at any given time, and also sign up with us for our newsletter. Thank you and have a wonderful time.